Hello, everybody. I'm Roger here with Regen Meals, and today we are talking with Jesse Nelson at American Beef Ranch. Jesse, how you doing?
Really, really good. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you, Jesse. Cool. So, for those of you listening, Jesse and I connected a few weeks ago on LinkedIn, and what I really like about Jesse and what he's doing with his ranch is he's taking a really unique approach to healing and building soils while balancing the economics of a farm. And I think every farm has to manage that tension, and it's a challenging one. And Jesse's just got a lot of insights on how to help improve soil, but also maintain the economic stability of a farm. So, Jesse, I guess my first question to you is just I would love to hear that your background and your story on have you grown up in farming? How'd you end up
Yeah.
where you are, and what are you working on today?
Yeah. So my family's farmed for 110 years in South Central Idaho. The whole gamut of it got big, fought, split up, farm. Kind of split up, and then when that happened, my part of the family ended up in a little bit different property, about a half hour away from the family farm, and they started raising cattle, and that's where I spent my entire childhood. From the early 2000s up all the way until like graduated high school in 2014 and went to university and all that stuff. Like I was there. And when we switched to cattle, that was great because I grew up around cattle. I love cattle. That was my thing. And we raised, probably 1,500 grass fed and finished steers direct to consumer from 2007 to 2020. And that was my grandpa's business, but I always say it was like the hands and the feet. Like I was always there. I was doing most of the labor. I was loading. I was going to the butcher. I was doing a lot of that work, and so I was there. And we went through that whole, sphere of grass fed and finished beef to where it was not a very good product to where it turned into a pretty good product. And at the same time, we were always the weirdos at the end of the road because our ranch is located at the end of the road, and that's great. But we were doing regen before regen was cool, and there's another. We have some other family members. We're doing the same thing on their row crop farm. They started doing that stuff. 2008 probably is when they started doing some more regenerative style conventional farming. But our place, we were doing or regenerative style grazing and raising cattle in that manner. And then it just evolved into, I went to school, went off, was living somewhere else. COVID happened, and my wife's job and my job all kind of quit happening. So we came back to the farm, and I worked for a cousin, worked for a custom farm company. We, did a lot of that stuff. And then a year later in 2021, we bought the farm. And from there, we've just been kind of, rolling it over. We had a lot of things happen all at the same time, and we're buying out family members. We were trying to decide, are we going to farm, are we going to ranch, what we're going to do. So we kind of went away from the cattle a little bit and just started farming. But it wasn't long after that we realized like we kind of had a niche because we hadn't sprayed our farm in 20 years. It hasn't been sprayed since 2000 at least. And so we could certify organic and kind of go down that route because we were already organic. We weren't doing anything that wasn't. And so then we moved down that route into more just basically organic farming, raising hay, and then now into some organic row crops that go to, local organic dairies. And from there, we, have now where we're at right now, basically, is branching back into food. So for 1 year, but well, I guess a little bit over a year now, we've had a pasture raised egg layer business that has been, perpetually sold out of eggs. We started getting back into the grass fed and finished beef. We've always had some cows, but like going back into the consumer market with it, we started this year in June. So we're going back into the consumer market with it, and we're looking to grow that. Um, and then we've gone down all the roads to irrigation improvements because here where we're at in southern Idaho, we have to have irrigation. There is no not having irrigation, and that's a whole nother topic in itself. But anyway, we've been improving irrigation efficiency and just trying to make it all work on its own, be able to each enterprise stand on its own, but at the same time work together to make a better end product. And so that's what we're working on right now.
Yeah, I love that. And, one of the things that I think is really unique about your approach is that I think for consumers that believe
Hmm.
in supporting farmers that are doing the right thing, there's questions of like rose-colored glasses that consumers have because they don't really know what life is like on the farm. And
Yep.
so like the idea of row crop agriculture and irrigation is something that maybe a conscious consumer would consider not regenerative, but
Yep.
those are some of the realities of what it takes to produce food in different environments. And I would love to just hear your thoughts, and you can dig into whatever part of your farm or more broadly, but like,
Okay.
sort of that difference between the idealist version of doing the right thing as a farm versus the practical versions of building soil.
Well, idealists, right? Especially in the beef industry, if idealists, regenerative ag, like we'd plant grass and never touch it, never, and just move on with life. Like we'd plant grass, rotate cows, and move on with life. And that's wonderful, and it works really well. But where we're at, where we have irrigation, and I think we can, a lot of us can agree, maybe not everybody, production agriculture is not going anywhere. It's but what we can do is make production agriculture less intensive, less aggressive. You know, we can do things to help improve the soil while we're still being very conventionally, farming. The row crop side of things, you can do it very conventionally, change up, add a few little things here and there, and really make it into a much more beneficial style of farming for the soil. And so where we got to really digging in is we got approached by somebody to sell some organic fertilizer. And at first I was like, look, I don't know anything. I don't know enough about it to really be dangerous enough to go sell it. Like I don't feel comfortable. And then they're like, no, 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 it's organic. It's really good stuff. You should look at it. And it was a really good product. And we did, we still sell it. We still have access to it. Um, but the deal with that product is we were putting it on, putting it on, putting it on, and it's supposed to do all these great, wonderful things, and it does. But the problem is that Mother Nature's timeline for correction is super long without intervention. And it's not that Mother Nature won't fix the problem or won't correct the issues, and not that she doesn't give the signs of what's wrong. But our approach is more okay, Mother Nature will tell you what's wrong via its weeds or other measurement tools. Like we're taking soil tests, we're taking compaction tests, we're looking at the electrical conductivity of the soil, we're looking at the bricks of a plant, which is a whole another topic too. But we are looking at all those factors and we are making management decisions based off those. And one of the big ones that sometimes we get a lot of flack for us. We're an organic farm. So on organic farms, there is available some sprays, but they're really expensive and honestly, they're not worth using. And long term, I don't personally, from a management standpoint, I don't want to use any kind of pesticide or herbicide because it's very detrimental to the soil biology and it doesn't help give anything back. Where tillage can. So tillage is one of those ones that we kind of get some people really get up in arms about with the regenerative movement is that if you do tillage or intensive tillage, then you're not regenerative. And I always come back with the same argument. I'm like, look, if we're in a production agriculture setting, we have a tillage is the best tool we have to break up hard soil. The problem that we have, and this goes for organic farms, conventional farms, whatever, is that we're not putting back the key minerals to help the soil become less compacted over time, right? We're not fixing the soil in any way, shape, or form to help it not go back to being compacted. And that's what I think the biggest difference that we are doing is so we're looking at adding, available calcium and sugar and so carbon, those carbon sources, right? Carbon is super important because carbon is what helps buffer your pH. For us in our area, we have super high pH. And for the longest time, everybody tell you got to put sulfur, 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 or gypsum or whatever which is the product that we sold or a product like that kind of blended together. We put that on, and yes, it will bump pH down, but it will never correct pH low enough to where we want to get the pH of the soil. Um, Calcium is the most important mineral for soil structure, and it has to be in an available form because usually there's millions of pounds of calcium in our soils, but it's tied to something. It's either calcium carbonate, calcium sulfate, something. There's a bond there. And when it's bonded like that, it's not able to do the job that available calcium can. So available calcium helps loosen, relax soil. And once you get that relaxed and then you have that sugar, the biology goes crazy and actually absolutely works overdrive because they can breathe, so they're not under pressure from the compaction. You've given them a home because the calcium has now given the structure the proper orientation for them to do their job. And then you gave them some food because biology are really finicky. And if you don't meet some certain criteria, they won't do anything for you. And I think that's one of my gripes with a lot of the regenerative movement is they don't even do the base level to get biology active, or they'll just skip it and go right to, hey, I'm going to spray biologicals out there. But those biologicals will, sure, they will give you a boost, but the boost is very small. You're not getting a long-term impact. And I'm sitting over here like the low level, the first rung is getting the soil right. So biology has the ability to do its job. And that's kind of where our thought process and our entire fertility program is based off of. And then when you look at the cattle, how do we integrate cattle? Yes, we rotate cattle on pastures. We have native pastures. We have some irrigated pastures. We're working on implementing the cattle because there wasn't very many at first. We're working on implementing more cattle into our system and having even cattle and chickens as a rotational crop on a grass pasture that we plant and use them as a rotational crop and move them around as we have a good crop rotation, which ideally for my area, where I would like to be is I would grow potatoes, wheat, and grass for cows. And I would just keep that in rotation because look, potatoes are real food. If you fix the nutrient density of the soil, potatoes will feed a lot of people, and those are better potatoes. It's good for people, right? You just don't have to deep fat fry them. Wheat, wheat that's processed properly and doesn't hurt people's stomachs is a good food source, you know. And on top of that, the wheat's pretty important to a chicken operation, whether that's butcher chickens or layers, because we need a feed source, and wheat can be the base of a feed ration for chickens, along with other grains that don't have to include corn or soy because corn and soy is everywhere. Um, right now, we're not there yet because the potato market's kind of hard, and we're literally just getting back into this idea of it. So we're like year two of even doing this, and I would hope, and now with some new partners and some new contacts that we have, we're going to be able to push that a little bit harder and a little bit faster.
Yeah, and that, you bring up markets, and that kind of is another layer of forces in the space that, one force is through the Dust Bowl and every way that we've farmed over the last 100 years in the US has led to these compacted soils. So the soil history is one, and then the market economics and the ag bill in the 70s and all these other challenges that have come up. So
Yeah.
I would love to hear your take on agricultural markets these days and how
Okay.
a regenerative farmer can can kind of carve out a space, whether it's stacking different products or like how a farmer who
Yeah.
cares about creating good soil can do that in today's markets.
The biggest thing about for us is creating consumer products instead of commodity products. So right, I think the big thing is we our entire agriculture system is based off a commodity market. It doesn't matter if it's corn, soybeans, potatoes, sugar beets, what have you. So like in my area in southern Idaho, potatoes and sugar beets are the big ones, right? Number one potato grower in the country, number two sugar beet grower in the country. Like Idaho's responsible for 20% of the sugar in the United States. Idaho's an agriculture powerhouse, but nobody's buying anything. Okay, we've been, corn and soybeans have been in a suppressed market for 3 years. Potatoes and sugar beets for 2 years have been super suppressed, and at this point, they're so below break even that farmers are like, we're just not going to grow them anymore. And the problem in Idaho is that, like the sugar beet company, for example, is grower owned, and you own those shares, and you have to grow those beets. So you are basically, otherwise you sell those shares. So you're basically forced to grow sugar beets for below cost, um, and so on and so forth. And it's not that those crops aren't important and can't and the commodity market's going anywhere overnight, because it's not. And it's not that you can't implement those crops into a program, but everybody says diversification is key, and they're exactly right. And I think we're starting to see a lot of farmers branch out, grow other things, and try other things. And then just with social media is so amazing. The best thing about social media is that we're able to market those products so much more efficiently and at a cost that we can afford, and you get those products out into the market. So as far as other markets, it's really hard for me because I'm not in the Midwest and I can't deeply understand the corn and the soybean market as much as I'd like to. If I had more time, I would. But from our standpoint, and I mean, we do it here in Idaho too, it's hard when they have grown the same two crops ever increasingly year after year after year, and have relied on a foreign nation to buy most of that product, when that foreign nation has always been hostile since modern production ag has been around. So I don't know. It's interesting, but those markets are going to struggle for a while longer. And I don't know at this point if I can say that corn and soybeans or something like that's going to come back. We really are going to have to develop other markets, whether that's South America, whether that's Africa. Like, we're going to have to go somewhere else with those commodity crops. And then as far as like, our commodities in South Central Idaho, like potatoes and sugar beets and stuff like that, like anymore, even milk, right? We have a big dairy industry here too. I think we're number 3 in the country for dairy. Like, we have milk going overseas to China now. Like, that's a big market for milk right now until China catches up and has their own dairies, right? So it's one of those things that it's really hard and it's really difficult. And I think other people will say that we are growing enough calories for 10 billion people. We are literally overproducing our calories. We're underproducing our quality of food. And that's the benefit of a regenerative operation. Number one is, over time you can reduce inputs. You can be in a production based system and reduce inputs and improve your soil. Reduce the cost of inputs and improve your soil. It's just, you know, we know so much more now about soil than we did 5 years ago or even 2 years ago. There's so many new things out there that can really help cut the input costs down. At the same time, it's probably about stepping out of your comfort zone and growing something a little bit different. And that's where the regenerative guys really, kind of win. They just, they don't listen to the noise, and they're really good at growing maybe something else, and they do it, whether that's pumpkins and having a pumpkin stand on the side of the highway, or growing non-GMO corn for grit and cornmeal and things like that, and packaging it small packages and shipping it to customers direct to their door. So I mean, there's a lot of opportunity. I think people just, they got to find it, and luckily for regenerative operations, I think it's easier to find if you're thinking in that mindset, because it doesn't matter what. If you look at the beef industry, people don't want to see cows in pens. You look at the dairy industry, people don't like, consumers don't understand why cows are in pens that are dirt and manure. Like, it doesn't make sense to them and it doesn't look right. And you look all across the farms, you'll hear conventional farmers say, well, I don't want to spray, but I have to. It's like, no, you don't. You don't have to, but you're choosing to. And that's another thing. Consumers, like, you're literally spraying poison on our food. We don't want to buy that anymore. So there's a lot of opportunities if you can get away from the super traditional conventional model. There's a lot of opportunities to sell products because consumers will pay a premium for it, and, you know, get a better product because they are. The other thing, last part of this, is that when we're looking at the cost of regenerative food versus, say, regular food, conventional food, except for beef right now, because beef's kind of the outlier, because everything that's beef is expensive. But the opportunity cost of those typical commodity products are not included, right? They don't tell you the glyphosate load inside those, that the long-term use of these products over 10, 20, 30 years, you increase your chance of cancer, increase your health risk, increase all this stuff. So yeah, regenerative food may be slightly more expensive up front, but in the long term, it's far less expensive to spend more money on food as a health item instead of just food. And so I think that's where regenerative farmer has a little bit of advantage also.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's a tough thing to wait short term versus long term,
Hmm.
across every layer for the consumer and the producer.
Hmm.
Like for the consumer, it's exactly that. If you can keep toxins out of your food and eat nutrient dense food, then decades from now, your health is going to be better and your overall annual health spend is probably going to be less.
Yeah.
And certainly true for us as a nation. Like the United States spends more per capita than anywhere else in the world on healthcare, and yet we have horrible health outcomes as a developed nation. So
Yes.
you can kind of see that, but I think one of the things that's really tough for everyone, and goes back to kind of that idealist versus rationalist perspective of like, it's really hard if you're already barely break even on a month to
Yeah.
spend more for your food in the
Yep.
short run.
Hmm.
But at the same time, if you can even eke out that extra 10% of your food budget to then opt for those more quality products, then it does have those benefits. And similarly on the producer's side,
Hmm.
like you can have the conventional method and have those conventional results, but then in the long run your soil quality is way worse. And
Way
so
worse.
having to so then trying to opt for these more regenerative building soil approaches is harder to do in the front run but better in the long run. And so that's where I get to this point of how can we make it easier for consumers or producers to step into that shift the right direction. And that's where I think what you do is unique because you're looking for these tweaks that help avoid that dip in the transition where there's like a big financial loss and if you can maintain some profit. So I'd love to hear like how if you were speaking to a farmer that's like looking similar size operation to what you have going on and
Yeah.
is trying to make some steps to build soil, like what should they do?
Um. Well, I think the to your point or to your question, what they can do is just basically get on top of the things that they probably should be doing anyway. You know, obviously from a financial standpoint, you need to know your numbers. You need to be in tune with your numbers. You need to figure out what it actually costs you to produce X unit of whatever you are producing. From there, it's just moving to slight, you know, production changes, and it's hard just to give a blanket because everybody farms it a little bit differently. But soil tests, soil tests, soil test, 100%. Good soil testing, once a year, twice a year is huge. It just gives you a good basis to work off of. And you have to be careful because there's a lot of these soil testing companies that get paid on the back end by fertilizer companies to make it look a certain way so they sell more fertilizer, and that's just the way it is. So a good independent lab, I mean, there's plenty of them out there uh, that have a great reputation. That's the beginning, and then you're gonna have to get out of your, probably out of your comfort zone a little bit, out of your what is the word I'm looking for? Out of your own echo chamber, you know, about what you've done, what is right with soil, and how to do it, and try some new things. So, like the three tools that I tell farmers they should have, you should have a soil penetrometer. A soil penetrometer is basically a rod with a pressure gauge on it that'll tell you where the compaction is, how tight the compaction is, and it'll help you make management decisions. So, like if we have a bunch of layers of compaction, you may choose one tillage tool versus if the entire soil profile is hard, you may use a moldboard plow. Like we're still using a plow today because it's the right tool for the job right now. And that's number one. And then you look at an electrical conductivity meter. This little steel probe, it's a soil temperature and electrical conductivity meter. You and I, we all have electricity in our bodies. Microbes do too. And you take that meter and you're able to slowly stick it down through the soil profile and you're able to see the electrical impulse in the soil. And if it's between certain levels at certain stages of plant growth, you're good. But one of the easiest ways to tell if you have excessive salt in your soil is using that electrical conductivity meter because it'll show super high numbers. There's way too much electrical charge. The biology is not going to be able to do the job that they need to do. Nutrients are not going to move properly. And you're going to have to go outside of the, traditional norm. Another thing, we talk about a Brix refractometer, and people say, look, that was 20 years ago, 15 years ago. We used those. We never could get our bricks to move. And with the new research that we have now, we know why a lot of those people were unable to increase their bricks, or which is the sugar content of a plant. If you don't know, inside of a plant, there's sugars. Sugar basically runs the plant. The plant makes sugar in the vegetative stage, shoves it down into the roots, into the soil for storage. It feeds the bugs. But then when the plant switches and goes to vegetative, so like when corn starts making the corn cob, right? When beans start putting beans in the pods, that sugar is sucked back up into the plant and used to fill those pods. And so that system is really important. The higher sugar content of the plant, the less susceptible it is to disease and pests. Pretty much every they're saying like 95% of the plants that we're growing nowadays are susceptible for that reason and that reason alone. And number one is because of our seed. Our seed is poor quality. It comes from poor quality plants. It comes from unhealthy plants. Healthy plants have super high bricks. Unhealthy plants have low bricks, right? So we are not getting seed stock from healthy plants. Okay. On top of that, we have anytime you have a GMO, the GMO produces a protein that protects it from, whatever spray that you're using, what have you, whatever pest it's trying to protect itself from. GMO crops will never be able to raise their bricks level because of that specific protein, whatever it happens to be. So GMO seed doesn't work there. And then from there, you start getting into well, you know, I'm just an NPK guy. I've fed NPK for years. When you look at nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and it makes up less than 3% of a plant on the dry matter basis. Okay. 94% of a plant is made up of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen once you remove the water from it. Most of that's half of that's carbon, 34% of it or 43% of it is oxygen. You got 4% hydrogen. That's sugar. That's literally sugar. It is literally made of those components. And so being able to create that system where we have carbon available in the soil, we have the biology in the soil to be able to move those into the plant. And then, the other few key minerals, which is a little bit of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which phosphorus and potassium, there's tons of in the ground. Nitrogen, if you have the bugs doing their job properly, nitrogen is there and you shouldn't need to add any extra. And on top of that, if you're using the number one and number two nutrient that you need for nutrient mobility in the soil, which is calcium in available form and phosphorus in an available form, calcium will induce a nitrogen cycle when it's applied to the soil and applied to the plant roots. That will induce a nitrogen cycle. And so a lot of times if you're using those nutrients instead, you wouldn't even need nitrogen. And it's just, you gotta, maybe hear some things that hurt. And I did too, because at first when I started farming, you know, we were organic, we were regenerative, and I was all on the like, look, I don't want to till the ground unless I have to. Like, I don't want to, disturb the soil that I've had there for 20 years. But I didn't realize, yeah, that soil's been there for 20 years, but my grandpa was an old guy, and sometimes we didn't rotate the cattle the best. Sometimes we caused compaction. Sometimes we didn't do the things we needed to do because we didn't know any better. Nobody told us. And we created a super, super hard packed soil that was really holding us back in all of the other, holding us back in yield, holding us back in quality. And as soon as we ran a moldboard plow through the ground and let air get back into the soil like it's supposed to be, we saw huge improvements. And I was like, oh, okay, there's something here. And I just, kept going down the rabbit hole. And then now we're into all these other things and how to be able to slowly make small changes to any operation and make them improve. And like I said, I do sell some stuff on the side. So I have some customers. We're in all sorts of crops, and we've seen improvement in the most conventional farms and all the way to my organic farm. And we've seen some differences in the rate of improvement, like how fast stuff improves on the two kinds of farms, but we're still seeing improvement across the board.
Yeah, and you bring up another great topic, which is soil amendments. And
Okay.
like Like there's so nitrogen and the Haber-Bosch method and the classic idea of nitrogen fertilizer and how it's historically been degenerative. Like my understanding of this is that when nitrogen fertilizer was first rolled out, it was pretty straightforward. It was here, put nitrogen fertilizer on this patch, not on this patch. Come look at it in 3, 6 months, and you'll see what happened.
And it,
But
and it was
that,
shorter time frame too, like 2 weeks.
oh
Because a
wow.
lot of those guys are running cattles and grazing, and it was a lot of pasture land that started that way, and that's how they got it. And those pasture lands were conventionally grazed, not regeneratively grazed. So it made sense why, well, look, that whole system is messed up. There's no nitrogen really getting into the plant anyway. So yeah, if you give it a little bit of lazy nitrogen, because chemical nitrogen basically skips the entire biological process, it can just go right to the roots. And so that causes other problems by making biology lazy and making the whole soil system kind of blah, is the best way to explain it. But to your point, conventional ag and conventional grazing systems like that, where they just graze on the same piece of ground over and over and over again until they get, like a putting green, right? And then you put some nitrogen fertilizer out there, yeah, you're going to get green up. You're going to get some growth. That makes total sense.
And so you mentioned it, like there are amendments that in the long run weaken the soil biology, weaken the productivity. And then there's actually amendments that can build that resilience and that production capacity. Like last time we spoke, we talked about calcium and how like it can actually do that.
Yeah.
And I think in the idealist regen, no till, no amendment, don't do anything to the soil. I would love if you could just bring some realism to that too and help us understand
Okay.
like how to amend soil in a way that improves soil.
Okay. Okay. So let's talk about chemical fertilizer first. Most traditional, go down to your co-op and get fertilizer, right? It's salt-based fertilizer. Salt doesn't do well in a soil system. It is important. You do need to have at least 0.5% of salt on your base saturation, which the base saturation, we're getting a little deep here, is your cat ions, so calcium, magnesium, hydrogen, sodium, and potassium. And there's certain percentages we want of those, right? And anyway, sodium needs to be there, but it cannot be over 3%, or you're going to cause problems. When you're putting on salt fertilizer over and over and over and over again, you know, yeah, it's small amounts over time, but that salt burns. The bugs ain't going to do their job because they don't have to either with chemical fertilizer. And then over time, that's where the degradation comes, because even though you have the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and potassium, something we didn't know when those chemical fertilizers first came out is that nitrogen burns up carbon with it. So as you're using nitrogen, you're also using carbon. And that's where you see the organic matter levels or organic carbon levels in the soil really start to edge off there. Uh, and it just depends on where you're at. Like in the Midwest, they still have decent organic matter. It's fallen a lot. In my part of the world, our organic matter on paper wasn't very good to start with. We have really awesome silt loam volcanic soil that just throws amazing crops. That does not make sense in my head whatsoever. But once you dig a little bit deeper, you can see, oh, they're pouring on the compost. There's guys putting 20 tons of compost per acre per year. And yeah, it's not very good carbon, and that's a whole nother conversation. But there's a buffer there. And so when you're using those high salt fertilizers, you're still burning up the carbon. And that degradation over time, because you have to have a certain ratio of carbon to nitrogen in your soil for biology to thrive also, which is something most ag soils don't have, you're seeing that degradation. And so from a standpoint of that, okay, let's like look, I've done the chemical fertilizer, maybe I do liquids, maybe I do whatever, maybe I spray all the time, maybe whatever, okay? So first thing I ask a farmer, let's do a soil test. We want to see a soil test with a good base saturation so you can see the nutrients, the cat ions, those are super important. But we also want to see the carbon to nitrogen ratio. We need to know the carbon to nitrogen ratio because that's going to give us a good footprint of how far we can push the soil. And also, we need to know something called the cation ion exchange capacity. And layman's terms, that's the soil's ability to hold on to nutrients. Clay soils have the ability to hold on to a lot more nutrients. So you can get away with huge amounts of nutrients on those fields, and they're going to be there. They ain't going anywhere, right? And then you come back down to sand. Sand, you got to be really careful because you can fix it really fast, but you can mess it up really fast. So, you have to be careful. And that's just a number between, it's like 0 to 50 usually, that tells you where your cation exchange capacity is. And that just helps us give an idea of what kind of nutrients we need to do. Okay. So then you dig in a little deeper, right? Let's talk about gypsum. So sulfur calcium dihydrate or calcium sulfate, right? Sulfur is super important and it's used and sold a lot of times in the wrong fashion, especially as gypsum. Yes, it will condition soil. It will help relax soil a little bit. It will help nutrients leach a little bit. But the problem, once again, is that calcium is tied to something. And calcium is the number one nutrient for nutrient transportation, biological health, what have you. That's where we start. And if you look at a soil test and you see how many pounds of calcium you have in your soil, you're going to be like, this guy is wacko. He has no idea what he's talking about. That calcium, like I said, is tied to something. It is calcium carbonate. We are talking about calcium that has been cleaned of the carbonate and has the correct electrical charge, because if we're conditioning soil, we need a different electrical charge. If we're trying to penetrate the plant stomata as a calcium supplement in season, that's a different electrical charge. So there's two different calciums. When we go into calcium, or like, a lot of the farms in the Midwest, to get their pH up, they're going to lime soils. They're going to put on calcium carbonate, and they're going to put on hundreds to thousands of pounds per acre, tons per acre. The calcium that we are using is so potent, we put on grams per acre, 1/5 of a pound per year, not more, because they have seen that with that product, if you put on too much, a plant is so healthy and feels so good that it will never go into the reproductive stage. It will stay in the vegetative stage. So 90 grams per year is about the max. And so what you do with the calcium, you literally put it, if we're doing a soil conditioning mode, we take it, we put it into a tank with some sugar, about 5 pounds of sugar per acre. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be fancy sugar, just straight up sugar. Go get it from the grocery store if you want to, or buy it in bulk. It does not matter. There's some other sugars that are really good that have other things in them that we can use, like some carbons that are called humic acids and fulvic acids. Like we can use those too. But regular sugar is great. And you just go spray it out on the ground. And as long as you have about 60% of the ground exposed, you spray it out on the ground in the fall is the best time, and you just let it sit there. And as Mother Nature washes that calcium into the soil, it opens up, it breathes, it allows the biology to start to work. Another thing that we look at, so let's talk about calcium a little bit deeper, is most of the weeds that we see, the big, nasty, terrible weeds, have a big taproot. That taproot brings nutrients up from down below up to the soil surface. And once those nutrients are back up to the surface and they're available, then you are able to see those weeds go away. Conversely, if you spray those weeds, they never fix the problem, right? So we never get down to the root of the problem. So almost always those big taproot plants or morning glory or any of the, or like uh kochia will show you that there's too high of salt, that there's something going on there at the top of the soil. But a lot of it is calcium that's available, because calcium is a large molecule and it's heavy. It falls down through the soil. It doesn't move up and down, left to right. It falls down through the soil. Now, people say, okay, so I get my calcium and I do this and I help relax the soil, but I still have all this super excessive, let's say, potassium. Potassium's way out of whack on my base saturation. There's a whole bunch of it there, and I can't get rid of it. That is then when sulfur becomes super important. You need sulfur to help move nutrients around inside of the plant anyway, but sulfur also helps us leach excessive nutrients out of the soil. So get rid of them, right? That helps get rid of those nutrients that are excessive, what have you. It doesn't really matter what it is. Okay. And it's just, then once we're started down this system, we're still doing the same testing. We're soil testing. We're using our soil penetrometer. We're using our EC meter. We're taking Brix tests, as long as we're, not GMO and not all that other stuff, right? You can use Brix to kind of calculate that. But slowly over time, with adding carbon to your soil, whether that's, you know, Like if you're a wheat farmer and you leave your wheat straw in the field, great carbon source. If you're a corn farmer and you have fodder, you leave it in the field, great source. There's humic and fulvic acid, spray on carbons, great source. You get the carbon levels up and you have the ground open. It's amazing what the soil can do. And um, trying to think here, what other point should we make? Okay, and another thing, the reason I'm so hard on tillage and think that tillage should be used a lot of the time is because that fodder, so straw, corn fodder, whatever have that you spread out on top of the soil. The problem is there is a ton of nutrients in that stover, in that straw, whatever have you. And if we have degraded soil, poor soils, Idaho soils like I have, degraded, low carbon, low organic matter, and you want to actually build those, leaving that stuff on top of the ground is a poor management decision. Yes, it will help you hold on to a soil moisture, and that's great. But over time, if you continually do that, it's never going to get you any improvement. The way to get improvement is to put that stover under the soil. Because if it sits on top, the sun oxidates it and all of that stuff gases off. Otherwise, if you have corn stover or wheat straw or whatever, and you take a plow and you flip it over and you put it underneath the soil, and then you add a little bit of calcium, a little bit of sugar, get the bugs going, and they start breaking down as that moves down through the system, you will see much faster accelerated results. Anytime that we can get outside of the conventional system is a good thing. So we'll go into this a little bit, but compost. There's a lot of people that are super, super big on compost. Compost is a good tool and it is a good buffer, but it cannot be used as a standalone improvement for soil because it has a few problems. Usually it's high in salt and high in potassium, and those can be problemsome. And it doesn't have the nutrients that your plant needs. You know why? Because it's still crap. The cow wants the calcium and the phosphorus and the carbon and the oxygen and the hydrogen. The cow wants those top five nutrients. And so there's going to be a lot less of those in manure and compost, especially cattle, from cattle sources than you would like to think. So you have to be careful because you can put on compost and never really get anywhere. Like everybody, like a lot of people in my area, tons and tons of compost, but soil's the same year after year. They're never getting anything. And it's because they still don't have the available calcium, the available phosphorus, the carbon, the oxygen, and the microbes in their soil doing the job they need to get them done. So it's another thing to consider. Um, there's other problems with manure with, glyphosate contamination, right? You spray the crop with glyphosate, it goes into the cows who get antibiotics, that comes out, it's in the manure, and then you put it back onto the soil. The only thing that can break down antibiotics or glyphosate, which is basically an antibiotic, is biology. Biology is the only thing that can break it down. So they have to take their time and spend their efforts breaking down those contaminants in the soil instead of working on the soil structure and feeding nutrients to the plant. And that's where we get low biological activity, and that's where you're feeding it that cheap or poor quality salt-based fertilizer from the local co-op, and you can really run into issues. So we can get completely outside of that, and honestly we have a lot of success not even putting nitrogen fertilizer on whatsoever to farmers fields.
Yeah, and you bring up two, again, somewhat idealist things about, I guess, compost or more broadly animal integration, and
Yep.
then also this idea of cover crops and nutrient fixing crops. Like the classic thing for corn and soy, right, is that the soy puts the nitrogen back in the soil for the corn in the next yield. Bridging that with the idea of tap roots bringing up nutrients, it does sound like maybe there's some form of cover cropping that helps kind
Yep.
of balance out that chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
But you also make a great point about keeping a certain percentage of the soil exposed versus covered, and how the biology interacts with that, and then how much you're
Yeah.
losing water in the soil and everything. I'd love to just hear like your thoughts on animal integration, cover crops, and
Okay.
how all that plays in.
So, and I think there's two distinct forms here, right? We have animal integration into cover crops where you're grazing cover crops, and you have just cover crops that you're terminating. So, using multi-species cover crop blend that you terminate, whether you're like trying to fix nitrogen, have some tap roots or whatever, is totally different than if you graze it and turn it into crap, because you still turn it into crap, right? But in a regenerative system, if it's not sprayed, if it's not all that stuff, right, and you're grazing properly, those cattle will help aerate the soil, that help open it up. They're going to put some material back in the soil, and so you can help the soil cycle that way, and you're not causing a detriment by spraying. It's still crap though, and so you got to be careful and make sure that you still have those available nutrients, calcium, phosphorus, and checking your carbon levels to make sure that they're still right, because it's still crap, and there's not going to be the nutrients that the top five that you really want there. And if you graze properly, it helps a lot because it opens up the ground mechanically. Whether we like to believe it, all these cow guys that regenerative graze and do it right, they are tilling the soil every time those cows go across those paddocks. It's very intense, it's very short term, and it's not to get to the point where it degrades the soil. It is still tillage. And there's no way of getting around it. That is still a form of tillage. Where I'm coming from, and from my point of view, as far as using cover crops or using stover or what have you, having the soil exposed, is that over time, what we're trying to do is get to the soil to a condition where we can leave it covered, where we don't have to expose it, and where we lessen the amount of tillage we're doing over time, right? At the beginning, it's going to be pretty intense because the soil is really degraded and it's not able to act like it needs to act. We have to intervene to shorten Mother Nature's time frame to get improvement, and that's all we're here for. And so, with some key nutrients that Mother Nature needs, and she will fix on her own. Once again, time frame super long. We can help cut those times to get that soil into a better system, and then over time, your soil could get hypothetically to a point where you wouldn't have to. It would be super healthy all the time. Maybe you strip till organic corn. You know, maybe we don't cultivate. Maybe we don't run across the ground as much as we have to. And that's something that we do too. There's a lot of organic farms that'll run across, they'll finger weed, they'll cultivate 2 or 3 times, and they'll damn their corn. We only go across the corn one cultivation pass. You know, we're not making those 3 extra passes. So there's there is things to say about making sure the ground can breathe because bugs gotta breathe, but we also have to use those other tools in our toolbox to make sure that it's necessary. And we're only making those decisions of tillage based off of what is necessary, and not getting excessive. And we're not just tilling to till. There has to be a purpose to it. Like, look, I have a lot of fodder out here. My organic matter is low. The best way for me to use this fodder right now, today, is to put it under the ground and give the bugs a home and some food to work off of, and let them break that down and turn it into matter for me for next year. And so that has to be a daily decision, and farmers make hundreds of little decisions every day, but it's the same thing. It's just thinking it a little bit different. As far as cattle integration, cattle can be great. They can create and destroy just like any other tillage implement, and they can help cycle nutrients, or they can help reduce the amount of nutrients that are available in a system. You just have to be able to measure it and understand that there's going to be limitations to all of it, especially with manure because it's still crap. Now, yes, there are some higher quality manures. Worm casings are far better as a biological stimulant. But I would also say, look, you want to use worm casings as a biological stimulant? Great. Okay, it will stimulate the biology. It'll give you a bump. But do they have a home? Can they breathe? Do they have another food source? Those are the other questions that we're asking. The other thing I'll say is that we in irrigation country, especially with irrigation pivots, we're afforded a lot more flexibility than somebody maybe in the Midwest to do some things. Just because if I want to run something on, I just inject it in my main line and run it on with my pivot, right? If I want to do that. And so we experimented this year with a biological reactor where we injected biology every time we irrigated. All the time we were injecting, some spores of biology. The good thing about that biology is, yeah, we were putting it on all the time. So we were always seeing those high populations of biology in that soil profile because we were putting them on constantly. And because we were putting them on constantly, we were seeing a lot faster improvement, right? Because they were able to get in there, work. Some of them died, a lot of them died, right? We were able to send them out there and sacrifice them like the Spartans did, right? But they were there all the time and they were able to work. You get into other cropping systems or dryland agriculture where you're not putting stuff on all the time, especially the biology, you're only going to get bumps. Okay, I put something maybe in my liquid starter blend or whatever, and I put it on in furrow. Hey, I get a bump here. Maybe I spray a foliar pass here. I get a bump here. Oh, I'm going to put on a fungicide. I'm going to nuke everything. But then after that, 2 weeks later, I'm going to come back in and put something on here. So you're getting bumps, and that's great. But long term, for the efficacy of the farm and the faster return on your investment for soil improvement, you're going to have to use some smart mineral nutrition and test. You've got to be able to understand why you're doing it. And I have the proof. We have the soil tests to show that what we're doing is actually doing something improving. They're not getting worse. They are getting better, and not just minusculely better. We are seeing significant improvements in these fields over 5 years, a 5 year period where, really we were working on it probably 3 years pretty hard. And we kind of got away from it a little bit, and now we're going back to it even harder. So there is huge room for improvement. And usually it's small tweaks. But tillage, implement tillage can create and destroy. It's how you use it. Cattle and grazing can create or destroy, and it's how you use it. Just, you have to be mindful of those two things.
Sure. Yeah, and on the note of soil tests,
Mm-hmm.
ecological outcome verification, or EOV, the whole world of certifications. I know you mentioned you have an organic certification on your farm because you've not sprayed for decades, and
Mm-hmm.
certifications are a mixed bag, right? Because it creates a barrier to entry for a farmer.
Yep.
It's oftentimes an arbitrary set of practices, maybe
Yep.
arbitrary. There's people who know what they're talking about who are choosing some
Yeah.
practices, but it's different in one region versus the other. So to me, outcomes maybe makes more sense, but a verification makes it that much harder for someone to sell a product. So like for example, on Regen Meals, we're not requiring our regenerative farms to hold a certification of regenerative. We're having
Yep.
conversations like this to shake the hand of the farmer, know what they're
Yeah.
doing and understand it. But I'd love to hear your take on certifications, EOV, and how you think consumers can trust farmers that are trying to do the right thing.
Unfortunately, a lot of the certification has been hijacked for marketing. Nothing more than marketing. Um, in the organics, so I can speak to organics. There's different certifiers all over the country. There's certifiers that there's like no territories, right? They're all crossed over each other, what have you. And what some certifiers allow or let happen under their watch, other certifiers don't. And so a lot of times maybe there is some farmers that are working together with different certifiers in organics, and one certifier approves some seed and another one, uses it on some guy's farm for like a lease or something, right? And then their certifier comes back like, hey, that's not organic seed. You can't use that. I'm like, and they go, well, I didn't know who that, they got to approve it. They're certifier. Why is it my problem? You know, they're like, well, there's organic seed available. You're supposed to use it. I'm like, I understand that, but I'm not the one doing the cropping in this. And they're like, it doesn't matter. So there's some of that where some of the, especially in organics, the certifications are kind of, certifiers can be difficult like that. I think they're all trying to do their best, but also we're seeing some of the bigger ones a lot of times get away with more than the little guys. It and I think that's just something we're seeing, and it's unfortunate, but it's there. As far as regenerative certifications, I lately in the last year especially have really struggled hearing the word regenerative because everybody and their mother has used it to sell a product, whether it's regenerative or not, or whether the company's regenerative or cares or what. Every big ag corporate company right now is selling regenerative something. And I'll be honest, I've been burnt out about it. Um, there definitely are really, really good regenerative certifications that mean something. And you have to prove it. And I think it's a good thing in the long run, but I never think it should be required. I mean, and you don't have to be, like I said, I don't think you have to be organic, or certified regenerative to want to have better soil, have more nutrient dense food, have better beef, chicken, pork, lamb, what have you. There's no certification that keeps you from doing that, right? And I know we didn't mention it. We talked about the kind of that yield drop, right? It's like, and I hate to accept the fact that that's a possibility. With all the tools that we have available to us now, there is no reason that a farmer can't stop doing some of those very detrimental items that they use, like sprays and excessive tillage without measurement, in their repertoire to help improve their soils. And we shouldn't see a drop. If you do it right, you won't see a drop. But I think more importantly, above all the certifications, is that we're not here to do the same thing we've done for the last 80, 90, 100 years in modern agriculture, right? We see that production ag as a whole, commodity farming, has major issues and consequences. Nutrient density, quality of food, quality of life, quality of health. There's other factors too. I still think that people have the ability to choose their foods and what they want to eat, and sometimes you're not going to be able to get around that, especially in the United States. There's people that will always choose healthy food because they want to. And I think there's people that do not care whatsoever. They do not care, and they're just going to eat what they want to eat. But at the same time, in the long run, for the whole of it, being a little bit more organic and being a little bit more regenerative is a good thing, but I don't think you need the piece of paper to prove it. You should be able to prove it in other ways. I mean, whether that's bringing people to the farm and showing and explaining how you do things. And that's where a lot of this education to the consumer becomes a lot more apparent. A lot of them don't know where their food comes from, and they would like to if you would show them, but you got to be able to show them. And I think that's why, like for us, YouTube has been great because we've had comments like, I never knew that was a thing. That's awesome to see. Thanks for showing and explaining that. Or, I get really specific into cattle because we do grass fed and finish. I'm looking for a very specific animal, and I explain a lot of the times why I want this specific animal for these specific reasons. And it's because the commercial counterpart does not work very well in our system. So we're having to change it. We're having to manipulate it. And so we get to these outcomes where I think a lot of people get wrapped up in the certifications, but a lot of times those certifications are just marketing to sell a product too. So, and consumers are much smarter and much more aware than they used to be, and much more aware than we gave them credit for. And it doesn't have to be those things certified to get the consumer that you want to get. I think that's where we're at right now, and it's nice to see. You just do the best that you can, explain why you do it that way, and consumers usually will, you know, probably understand, or at least try to understand.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, at least for me as a consumer, and
Hmm.
there's that curve of like innovators, early adopters, early majority, like the adoption curve in a
Yeah.
market.
Yes.
And I think that consumer behavior of researching the actual producer of the food that you're buying is starting to go through that curve. Like there's that, we're in that like early adopter, almost early majority phase where people are starting to care. I do agree that like there's that late majority chunk that just like a huge percentage of the US is just going to buy whatever's cheaper on the shelf. They're just going to look at the dollar and move on. And that's not going to be that's the commodity market, right? And maybe
Yeah.
that ends up being globally sourced, and maybe it's the consumer driven market that really is where regenerative producers can thrive. Um, on that note, you'd mentioned farming grass-fed, grass-finished beef. And I remember
Hmm.
last time we touched base, you said there were a couple times where like it came off gamey a couple years, and you actually kind of tweak some things to figure out a product that, from a culinary or like a chef's standpoint, is something that they
Yes.
could serve at a high-end restaurant and get good
Hmm.
feedback on. I would love to hear your take on that.
So I kind of have some hard stances, just like I don't believe that switching to different practices is going to cause a drop in your income or yield or what have you. I also think that if you get a bad piece of grass fed and finished beef, it's one of two things. Every now and again, there's a bad animal. There always is. It doesn't matter how good of what you have, there's animals that are just poor and they don't perform. At the same time, the producer didn't do their job. And I will tell people that. And there's people that want to get into it and get started. And, I just caution them. I'm like, if you want a good product, you can't just go put random animals out on a pasture and expect them to perform. The grass pasture part of this is super important. And as the pasture quality comes up, it helps mask some of those issues. But when we started, so my grandpa got cancer, and that's where it started from. Is he wanted to keep eating meat and potatoes like he's ate his entire life, but he's like, well, I can't keep eating the same stuff because it's not helping my cancer. So that's where the grass fed and finished came from, kind of started from. He went to a grazing school. He went, and ended up starting a group with some partners. And at first, I'm the kid that's in 4-H growing up, looking at what everybody else is doing, and nobody's doing this stuff. They put cows in a pen and they feed them corn, and I'm going like, this is dumb. This is not going to work. And I was a stick in the mud when I was younger. What I had been, probably fifth, sixth grade when this started. So I was, old enough to have an opinion that wasn't worth listening to. So the as we got down this road at first, it was super tough and super gamey. And what we did at first is we just took our commercial cow herd and we crossed them into smaller animals. But when we first started, we just took some of our commercial animals and let them graze grass for an extra year and then butchered them. And it was terrible. It was tough. It was gamey. It didn't taste very good. And this comes from where you were talking about the USDA in the 70s, get big or get out. Same thing happened in the cattle industry. The cattle have gotten bigger over time, and cattle inherently are not designed to eat corn or processed grains or grains that have been influenced by humans, basically meaning cracked open so they can get to the starch. They're biologically not predisposed to do or to eat that way. But we've grown them so big that that's become the only way we can get them to finish properly. And when somebody says finish, that means get the marbling inside the meat where the flavor comes from, but also the marbling is where most of the nutrients are, like your fatty acids and all that, and your CLA and your beta carotene, all that stuff is in the fat. So that fat is super, super important. So we learned really fast that commercial cows, just putting them on grass was not going to work. It was really poor. But over time, you know, I would say it took us about 5 years. About 2012, I was in high school at that point. The product got really, really good, and things had changed quite a bit. We went from our standard commercial cow being 1,400 pounds to our average cow weighing 1,000 pounds. So we shrunk the frame by a third. We increased our stocking rate by a third. So we have smaller cows. We have more smaller cows on the pasture than we had bigger cows. And that turned into more pounds per acre of beef that we could produce in that system. But those cows also, we were always looking for a very specific cow. And we culled very heavily, or we removed animals out of the breeding program very heavily. We were very specific in some of the key bulls that we started buying. Originally, you could get really good bulls super cheap. It's changed a lot. You can't do that anymore. They're super expensive now. But we're lucky to the point where we're able to raise stuff that's good enough that we can use, and actually pretty impressive, actually. But over time, we basically made the frame size shorter and wider. There'll be people that'll say 8 pounds of sugar in a 5 pound sack. That's what you want your cows to look like all the time. It doesn't matter, and we do this. We push them hard on native grass pastures. Like, go out there and ink out a living for us and come back in. If they come back fat, we've kept them. If they came back skinny, we got rid of them. They weren't able to convert that feed as efficiently as some of those other animals. And we did that for a long time till now we have this base herd that we've built off of to where pretty much every calf we can get to finish properly on grass and have a super high quality product. It's not gamey. It's got good tenderness. It's got good texture. It's got great flavor. The tenderness is not going to be as good as a corn-fed animal, but you're just not going to get around that. But it's still very, very good to the point that we're confident enough to sell it in a high-end restaurant because it's that good of a product. And so and it takes time. The next step and the next evolution in that is having great grass pastures. As the pastures improve and the cattle improve, you really can get there a lot faster. But really, really good cattle can take okay or mediocre pasture and still make pretty good beef. But poor cattle on great grass will never produce great grass fed and finished beef. And there's just no way of getting around that. They go hand in hand, but the cattle always come first.
Hmm. So then how would a farmer who's trying to adopt this grass-fed, grass-finished approach get some animal integration going on their setup? How would they find a good cow?
The proper animals. Um, Luckily for social media, there's a lot of people that do it now, and you can
Hmm.
reach out. And it depends on what region of the states you're in. If you're in the southeast, you probably need some cattle with a little bit of ear. You need some Centipole. You need some South Pole. You need some of those red cattle, longer ear genetics, just because of the where you're at. Where I'm at in the northern climates, it's really hard to beat the English breeds. I don't like the French breeds, Charolais, Simmental, and those because those are bigger boned animals, and they just do not do as good as the English breeds. And as far as English breed goes, Angus is the easiest because there's the widest variety of genetics. That's a great place to start. That's what we run. We specifically choose to have we have both black and red Angus, but we like red Angus because it does get pretty warm here in the summer and it doesn't usually get below zero here in the winter. So they kind of fit into that temperature range a little bit better. If you're in Montana, you probably want a black hided animal. If you're in North Dakota, you want a black hided. Minnesota, stuff like that, you probably want a black hided animal. Those colder, northerner climates, a black animal is a really good thing to have. Um, there's some other breeds that are really interesting. Literally any of the English breeds. Not so much Hereford. They have some genealogical issues. They still are great cows and they'll finish right. But like Shorthorn is great. I mean, Angus, obviously, White Park, British White, those are all great cows. But I would say if somebody wants to get started in it and they're in a little bit of a northern climate, I think a breed to look at, here's a little spec for somebody if they want to get started, is Murray Grey. So Murray Grey comes from Australia. It is a Black Angus Blue Roan Shorthorn cross that was crossed several times until it became its own breed of cattle. And they are very impressive animals. Obviously, in a grass-fed and finished situation, you still want to keep in mind your frame size and all that stuff. But there has been very, very, very many times where a general Murray Grey steer in a carcass contest will outperform the best Angus steer. Their breed just seems to be a little bit higher quality all the way across. I think that goes back to some of their breeding. Where in the Angus world, everybody and their mother has bred them for 50 or for over 100 years, right? And so there is a lot, which is great because you have a lot to pull from, but also there's a lot. So there's a lot of stuff all mixed up in there. There's some really bad genetics where in Murray Grey, I have not seen that as much. And if I was to start over tomorrow, I would probably start with Murray Grey. But that's just me. But there's a lot of other animals you could choose from. And I would just say for somebody looking to get started, try to seek out somebody in your area and just go look at their operation and see what they have. Because usually they would love to show you. This is why we do this. This is why we do that. And take everything with a grain of salt and just try to do as much research as you can. And there's YouTube is a great source. There's numerous videos. There's a lot of producers. You can find people that are doing it well, and you know, maybe not do it exactly how I think you should do it, but they're doing it well still.
And then similar question. So like all of those different breeds and all the nuances that a producer would take to develop
Hmm.
a beautiful, robust,
Hmm.
healthy end product versus the consumer who just goes and grabs the pack of pound of ground beef off of the shelf. Like there's a lot of education for a consumer there where there's more for them to learn. How
Yes.
would you like what's like a good first step or a good way for a consumer to start kind of digging into this?
I think consumer does the same thing. Social media, it's everywhere. You can learn it. There is a lot of the between the grain fed and the grass fed people. There's a lot of I don't know if I want to use animosity, but there's a lot of stuff going back and forth right now. The good thing about it is the grass fed industry finally has some really good scientific research from Carbon Cowboys and their hemp grazing model. They have done some awesome research, and it shows just, you know, the biggest thing, like if you grab two packages of ground beef and one's from a local grass fed and grass finished producer versus a grocery store produced beef, you'll notice right away the color, how much deeper red the color is of the meat that you get from your local producer versus the lightly colored red meat that you get from a typical CAFO fed steer. A lot of that has to do with their diet because there is some genetic and gene mutation that does happen when they are fed corn. There's a lot of like I said, the fatty acid balance is way off. There's a lot of those nutrients that are not in that product. And then you have a grass fed and finished beef. We know about, 10 or 15 major nutrients. But with this new research coming out, we're seeing also the phytonutrients or the plant nutrients in the grass that they're eating is actually getting transferred into the meat where it's not happening in the CAFO because they're the corn and the soy and the feed stuffs there are so low nutrient anyway that they're not transporting those nutrients into the meat. Whereas on a grass-fed finished operation that's grazing in a really regenerative manner is seeing those extra nutrients. And I think Carbon Cowboys, their movie is really interesting and really intriguing, and most people seem to really enjoy it. I think that's a great place for the consumer and somebody that's interested in starting raising cattle. I think that's a great source.
I love it. Jesse, anything else that you'd like to from a so I mean, I guess first off, so where can people find American Beef Ranch on socials, online? Where could if people like your product, they like what you're talking about with the cows, they want to buy some meat, where can they go?
So we're on YouTube, American Beef Ranch. It's green logo just like this. You can find it in there. Maybe the black logo. I don't know. Either way, I am on LinkedIn too. Uh, I do a lot of those are some heavy, really hard, heavy thinking posts, as you can attest to. There's a lot of I would say harsh truthness in there that some people take and some people don't take. So there's some of that on LinkedIn. We are on Facebook and Instagram. My wife runs those. I don't have anything to do with them because I don't have that stuff. So, she does stuff over there. You can check us out there. But our website, abfranch at gmail.com. So just the letter A, beefranch behind it or that's my email address. abfrench.com is our website, and you can get in contact with us there. We're not shipping currently, but if you're in the southern Idaho area, and area is a big word for this part of the country, we could probably get you hooked up with some product. And I mean, really, closing thoughts I have, no matter the farmer, they're all trying their best and they would all love to do better. Sometimes they just don't know how. And even the most conventional guys, I would say probably 95%, there's always going to be some people that just don't care. But for the most part, want to leave the farming economy, community in a better way than they found it. And they are becoming a lot more open to trying new things. And we are starting to see that with the sale of some of our mineral nutrition products, you know, breaking away from some of the traditional thought processes. And, I think we'll see it. My cousin said it best. The cousin that was regen before regen cooling in row crop farms, they have a like a soil health day at the local college here put on by the state university. And when they first started that 10 years ago, it was just him and the university extension agents that were there. That was it. There was nobody else. And now, there was last year there was 150 people there, you know, and so it is getting better, and we're all trying to do better. Sometimes they just don't know how. So, you know, don't go after them. Don't, they're still great people. They're still trying to do their best, but you know, it's just they can only do what they can do, right? And we have a lot of financial risk tied up in farming, and it's really hard sometimes to go outside of what has worked. And so there's some of that, but we're proving it every day, and it's getting better every day. And so I think you're going to see more and more of this, which is awesome.
Agreed, brother. Yeah, I think there's some cool things that we're seeing on both the consumer and the producer side where people
Mm-hmm.
are caring about it. They're open to digging into these nuances, starting to understand,
Mm-hmm.
meet people where they are and just see what
Yeah.
improvements can be made. And Jesse, I appreciate you taking the time to hop on, man.
Oh, no problem. It was great. Like I said, we're all trying to do a little bit better. It'll get better tomorrow and the next day. So,
And for those of you listening, if you want to
mm-hmm.
donate American Beef Ranch's beef to local food donation sites near their ranch, support their local ecology, and support alleviating hunger in that area, you can go to regenmeals.us, pull up American Beef Ranch, and you can donate their food to places near them.
It's awesome. This guy's platform is super cool, people. Like when he first told me about it, I'm like, that is awesome. Like that is super cool. Just be able to, get it out there to more people that can genuinely use it. Like it could genuinely help people, make them feel better. You know, we didn't talk about that much about not being able to eat out much anymore because it doesn't sit well. You have to eat real food at home now. There's a lot of that going around, and so if it could get to more people's hands and help more people, all about it. And this platform where anybody really can come in and say, look, I love their product, what they're doing. Let me donate because they can give that to somebody who can use it. That's super, super awesome. So we're glad to be a part of it.
Thanks, Jesse. Appreciate you having you on, man. We'll talk
Yeah.
soon.